music. Let's talk about why.
Music is like the backdrop to all the important moments of our lives.
And for every one of those unforgettable moments, there's a song attached to it.
The stories behind your favorite records.
I can picture myself sitting on the floor and listening to that album over and over. And I wish I could get into my 9-year-old head and just feel what it felt like to hear that.
The artists that mean the most to you.
I gotta say, if you don't at least have an appreciation for Michael Jackson, we can't be friends. There's nobody that doesn't like Michael Jackson. If you don't like Michael Jackson, seriously, this may offend you, and I hope it does. There's something wrong with you.
Where music has been and where it's going. These are the music conversations that matter to you most. This is Feedback with Nick Carter and Lori Majewski.
Hour number 3 of Feedback. Jim Shear in for Nick Carter, joined by Lori Majewski. And we now welcome Clinical Associate Professor and Director of the Music Business Program at NYU, the one, the only, Larry Miller, who is also host of the Musonomics podcast.
Thank you, everybody.
Musonomics. And as we just learned a few minutes ago, someone who helped to start Z100. So he's actually kind of a radio guy, Z100 here in New York.
True. It's all true. And, Jim, you must be exhausted just reading that title.
You must be exhausted living it.
It is a 24/7 thing, I got to say.
Well, before we actually get to what's in the report, I think it's interesting that a comprehensive report that highlights how record labels are evolving in the streaming age was commissioned by the RIAA.
Right.
So I have to say, isn't there a chance that you could be just a little biased toward giving some good news to the record industry since they're the ones who hired you?
So I suppose that the RIAA could have hired somebody else to write this report, which is, a report about how record companies have changed everything that they do in the, streaming and post-streaming world. And, we can talk about that. But I had been thinking about writing this report for not a super long time, but for the last couple of years. And really, it's been the last 3 years during which the companies have really utterly changed the way they do everything that they do, and that story hadn't been told. And I wanted to tell that story, and the RIAA gave me the opportunity to do it.
And so it was like they figured now is the time, sink or swim, survive or die.
Well, I don't know about sink or swim, survive or die. The fact is, over the last, 15 years or so, the music industry, the recorded music industry in particular, has gone from operating in, survival mode to a period of dramatic restructuring, death, destruction, billions of dollars in value was just vaporized over that, 15-year period. And now, over the last 3+ years, the business has gone into a period of rebirth, resurrection, growth, and you can feel it walking around any record company.
Well, I feel it talking to record label people. You talked to them 10 years ago, there was a different mood. You talk to them today, and they're like, yes.
Well, walking around the label, so about 3 years ago, right before I started here, is probably the last time I was in the Sony building. And if you know the Sony building that's over here on Madison Avenue, it's extremely glamorous. When I used to have lunches in the Sony Club, right? And there's Jennifer Lopez at the next table. There's only like 10 tables in the Sony Club, and you would see, stars and Tommy Mottola, and it was a big deal to be invited out to lunch at the Sony Club.
Absolutely.
Right? But Sony, it was many different floors of different labels, And it was to me so glamorous. And I went there 3 years ago to do an interview with an artist, and there was almost no one there. An entire floor that used to be a record label. There was no assistants. There were barely anyone in the offices. It was all empty. And I thought, oh, this is the end.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the end of the big record labels.
Right. So I see this every day in my role as the professor and faculty member who runs the music business programs at NYU. I've been in that role for about a half a dozen years. And 5 years ago, if you were to ask a room full of college students how many of who were majoring in music business, how many of them wanted to go out into the world and work for a record company or a major record company in particular, you'd see a couple of hands go up. I asked that question last month of a room full of 50 freshmen, and 3/4 of them aspire to, go to work in one of the three majors. It's a sea change.
Wow. So I was a little bit cynical when we started because it felt to me, if you're hired by the record labels to interview people from the record labels to give them a report on record labels, it felt to me like there was a chance that you might want to give them some shiny, happy news. But you're saying you are an independent researcher, and you did in fact find a sea change. You found good news to be had, and it's reflected in the fact that kids actually want to go into record label business.
Yeah, and look at the data is the data, right? So over 3/4 of all of the revenue in the recorded music business is driven by streaming today. That is a recent phenomenon, and of course, we've had streaming services in the music industry since, I guess, 2001 with Rhapsody and, download services since around that same era. We can talk about, I suppose, how things have changed during that sort of crossover period of the last few years when paid iTunes downloads, which did nothing but grow and grow and grow and grow from the time that they were introduced until really there was one quarter in 2013 or 14 when they started to go south a little bit. And I remember when we were all kind of looking at each other and scratching our heads and saying, geez, why did this happen? Is the music bad all of a sudden? And of course, Spotify had just started in the U.S. and other streaming services were coming on board. And now, we know why. People like to stream their music in very, very, very large numbers.
When did that kick in? Because like you said, I remember Rhapsody being around forever, and I thought, no one's ever going to pay $9.99 for a month of music.
Yeah, who would do that? So Spotify started in 2008.
In the UK, right?
In Stockholm.
Okay.
And then came to the U.S. in 2011. And then, really it has only been for these last roughly 3 or 3.5 years that the numbers have just grown dramatically, and you can see it in my report, which anybody can download on musonomics.com. You can't miss where the report is for to download it and read it. But there's a really great chart that shows how the sources of revenue in the recorded music business have changed over like a 10-year period by format. And you can just see that streaming bar grow and grow and grow and grow to the point where for the first half of 2018, which was the last period that we had a data set for, it's now over 75% of all of the revenue. And that has changed the way the record companies do everything that they do.
Yeah, there's a graph on the report where you see the physical copies go down, but the streaming go up.
Yeah. And, it is how it is, at this point. We can talk, I suppose, about the decline of the CD business, and we can talk about the growth of the vinyl business. It's always fun to talk about vinyl, and the fact that vinyl is even a thing nowadays is, it's kind of a cool thing. It's the first time, I think, in the history of the media business where any format that was facing extinction came back to become even worth talking about. But it's still only about a $400 billion business.
That's not sustaining, the expense account of a Clive Davis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if we really think about it. But it's interesting, we're talking about streams, and one of the most interesting quotes in your report is from UMG EVP Michelle Anthony, and she talks about how important a record label can be. She said, "Don't mistake millions of streams for a career."
Yeah. Michelle was a great interview. She does not mince words if you have ever met her. And yeah, so there was a reason why Michelle said, don't confuse, millions of streams for a career. And here's why. Many of you may know that Spotify has opened up their platform in really the last half year or so to independent artists to be able to upload directly to the service. And you could ask the question, not just because Spotify is opening up the platform directly for artists to be able to upload, music without the need for a label or intermediary. You could ask, even for the 10 years or so before that, when the technology for making music and making it available to people became cheap and, democratized, accessible to, almost anybody. So theoretically, any of us, by the time we are done with this interview, could, smash out a piece of music on our laptop and upload it directly to Spotify or perhaps another, digital music service. So you might ask, so what's a label for then? When the gates to distribution are no longer utterly controlled by record companies, not just major record companies, but record companies in general. When you're not competing for scarce, shelf space in a retail store anymore, what's a label for? And I think that the Spotify announcement and that the existence of this availability at Spotify and Apple Music and other places for an artist to be able to access the possibility of getting discovered directly, that the question is worth asking. Mm-hmm. And because that question is on the minds of lots of people who work in the music industry, at record companies, or are artists or fans, that it was time to answer that question. And that's what we intended to do with our report.
So if someone does come up to you and say, I don't need a record label, I have a song on Spotify right now and a whole bunch of people are listening to it.
Right. So
so what do you say to this kid?
Yeah.
Sit down.
Right.
Sit down.
So I get that almost every day.
And then you reply with?
I reply with...
For starters.
First I take a breath. I take a sip of coffee. And I say, it is amazing that you or anyone can make your music theoretically discoverable by hundreds of millions of people around the world without anybody getting in the way. That's amazing.
And without having to book studio time, too.
Without having to book studio time. And, you can make a, possibly competitive sounding record on a laptop today, especially if you're if you're making electronic music.
Yeah,
if
dance music.
Yeah, if you're using real instruments, it's, it's a little bit harder.
Still tough.
Yeah. But, you don't need, the big room, and you don't need 6 months in a studio to, produce a competitive sounding record and at least become theoretically discoverable by fans. However, it's interesting to note, I think, that of all of the music that was streamed on Spotify last year, literally, 99.9% of it came from the top 10% of music that was streamed on the service. So think about that for a second. Virtually all of the streams that happened on Spotify were generated by the top 10% of music that was available. So, I think what we're pointing to here is that you've got to cut through the clutter somehow, and that there is a big difference between making your music potentially discoverable by a fan somewhere and actually having someone care about it. And now that we have moved from an economy where we are trying to find an audience for a piece of music and be utterly focused on what happens during, release week, street date, remember? When everything was just focused on street date and the one-time transaction. Now it's about putting together a machine, if you are an artist or an artist manager, that is capable of maintaining that relationship, that connective tissue, that level of engagement between the fan and the artist that is continuous. And as one of the executives said in our report, it's no longer, just about what happens on street date. It is about, conquering a series of hills that extends for miles. And so the lifetime of an album cycle in particular is much longer now than it ever was before, and the amount of resources required to find and engage an army of fans in every territory around the world is hard for somebody to do as an individual artist, whether they're a student of mine or just somebody creating music in their bedroom, someplace else. There is, we discovered, little substitute for having, boots on the ground in 60 territories around the world, all sort of marching to the same beat, committed to making you be the most successful artist in the world, if that's what your ambition is.
Yeah, well, but that's one of the things I did get out of the report, that it really is a system that now more than ever favors the superstars. That, especially what you just said, that 10% is what is really getting streamed. So, there used to be, labels used to, I feel, push out more niche artists and smaller artists. We used to call them baby bands, right? Baby bands back in the day. And now it feels that they're really invested in superstar artists as brands, the 360 approach, rather than a really great record from an unknown band, because that unknown or lesser known breakout band, baby band, doesn't have the followers on social media, or doesn't have that thing. So again, am I being too cynical here, or do you think that we really have moved our label system toward more than ever favoring the superstars?
I don't know about favoring the superstars.
And they do pay for the labels. I get that. But so I don't know if it's favoring giving them more attention than they even used to give them.
Well, so the music industry has always been about having hits, big, giant hits. And for the biggest companies in the world that are operating in dozens of countries all over the place, you can't really move the needle, with a band that really just wants to hit a single, No,
but Nick always talks about how you can actually make more money off a one-hit wonder, and we've talked about this on the show before. But it does seem that right now that it's stacked against you if you're an artist that's a more specialty flavor, I guess.
Well, let's talk about the most popular genres in the world. All right. And so, hip hop is really big right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest.
Right. And so hip hop and rap are just these monster, growth formats. Rock music, a genre that I grew up with and, worked in for many years, has been declining in the streaming economy, at least so far.
Because they don't do collaborations. That's what we talked about this morning.
Yeah, that's part of it. Is that rock bands just don't do features on each other's records. That's kind of an artifact of the hip hop business, right? And yet I don't think that we can just lay it at the feet of they just don't do features. I mean, why else is rock becoming, I don't want to say a niche format on the streaming services, but it is certainly not the dominant format that it was on, say, AM/FM radio a generation ago.
Well, I think it's also that it doesn't have the stars. It doesn't have we grew up with rock stars. Now it's hip hop stars and pop stars.
Yeah. And to the point, Laurie, that you were just making about 360 deals, maybe we should just explain a little bit about what that means and how that's changed. And so in the early 2000s, when CD sales were really starting to go into steep decline because people were doing peer-to-peer file sharing and Napster and LimeWire and Grokster and Thister and Thatster. The major record companies, led initially by Warner Music Group and then adopted by the others, started to say, hey, wait a minute. We, the record company, are taking the greatest risk of anyone associated with the artist. We're taking more risk than managers. We are taking more risk financially and earlier than music publishers. We are taking more risk than talent agencies who are booking talent on tours. We're taking more risk than merchandising companies, the T-shirt companies. Like, we're taking all this risk in getting an artist established and building a brand that can become just a gigantically valuable brand. And yet, the one revenue source that we're able to, get any payback from, recorded music, is just getting crushed.
Exactly.
This is dumb.
Thus, we need your T-shirts, too. We need your concert T-shirts. We want a piece of your concerts. That's where you're still making money. We want a piece of your tours. So 360 meaning the whole universe. We want a piece of the whole pie.
Yeah, the whole enchilada. Now, in those early years, the 360 deals were viewed, and I think not unfairly, by the legal and the artistic community and by many fans as being, a bit of a land grab by the majors and even by the sizable independent record companies. And I owned one in those years, and we, like everybody, went for acquiring as many rights as we could at the time of the signing. But the difference between then and now is that in those years, the companies were getting passive minority interest in all of these other revenue streams, a percentage of the touring business and maybe a percentage of the merch business. And even then, if there was going to be a publishing deal, which addressed the musical compositions, the songs that the artists might have been writing, that within the 360s, they were looking at merchandising deals and live and direct to consumer and other stuff that wasn't part of the traditional record deal, without, I gotta say, adding a lot of value. Then the big difference between 2003 and 2019 is massive capability. Thousands of some of the smartest people in the world that I've met in the last couple of decades, billions of dollars being invested in creating value in every one of those areas. I mean, I learned that the three companies all own merchandising companies, for example, that now do a lot more than just make T-shirts to sell at the merch table or on the big board when you go to a big concert. many years ago, that was kind of passive participation. The label or rather the artist and the manager would make their own deal with a third-party merchandising company. Now, the companies own massive businesses that do nothing but that, and create mechanisms and products that bands, artists can sell directly to consumers, and just have enormous expertise in what we used to call database marketing, and what we might say today is leveraging data science and being able to kind of separate signal from noise from the oceans of data that are coming in from the streaming services, and turn that into smarter business decision making. It was really dramatic. I mean, the difference couldn't have been more stark if you were to compare, say, 2003 to 2019 in that regard.
Will you stick around?
Sure.
All right. We are speaking with Larry Miller, NYU professor, who is discussing his report on the state of the record label in 2019. If you have any questions for Larry, please call us up, 844-686-5863. You are dropping some knowledge on us today on Feedback.
Watching these rappers that rap and walk in and leave out with millions. Headed and sweating, open that front door and a scope printed out right by the entrance. Door closes, not a metaphor. Then I start towards that front desk right where you checking. Dressed in a uniform, looking like a janitor.
You're listening to Feedback.
For the money like a bull, looking in the eyes of a matador. Fuck you, carrying 2 cans of paint. Security looks at me awkward. I say 3rd floor, I'm late. Painting Jimmy Iovines' office, holding my breath about the paint. I'm scared to death that he stops me.
Taking you inside the world of music. This is Feedback with Nick Carter and Lori Majewski.
What most people don't realize about working in radio is that it is hungry work. I mean it. And cooking can seem like a chore, but that's where HelloFresh comes in. They take the guesswork out of cooking by offering a wide-ranging menu with classics that we know and love, like Gorgeous Greens Faro Bowl or the delicious Chipotle Spice Steak, to recipes you might not be as familiar with, courtesy of their gourmet menu. Get fresh and affordable, high-quality ingredients delivered right to your doorstep, pre-measured, so all you have to do is follow the recipe. It could not be easier. That's what makes HelloFresh America's #1 meal kit. For a total of $60 off, that's $20 off your first 3 boxes. Visit HelloFresh.com/volume. That is HelloFresh.com/volume.
Feedback, connecting you with the biggest names in music, past, present, and future.
Another day that the posters on my wall have come to life.
Volume, Sirius XM 106.
Your music to my eyes.
We have returned on Feedback. Jim Shear in for Nick Carter, joined by Lori Majewski. We have been talking with Larry Miller, NYC professor, host of the Musonomics podcast, talking about his report on the state of the record label in 2019. Before we get deeper into our chat, I want to give away something. A $50 gift certificate to Pro Flowers, no purchase necessary. Valentine's Day coming up next week, so we are looking for caller number 14. And head over to proflowers.com and click on the mic in the top right corner and enter my code FEEDBACK to retrieve the daily deal of the day. Once again, we are looking for caller number 14 at 844-6-VOLUME, 844-686-5863. $50 gift certificate to Pro Flowers. Larry, I should have had you read that. You've got the voice of God.
Right, seriously.
I can read the next one.
Yeah.
No, I was seriously going to hand that over to you, but I don't know the legalities behind it. Like, you can't do it. No, a guest can't read the copy. But you should, because your voice is that good.
Sirius XM Volume.
Yeah.
Lock it in and rip the knob off.
After the show, will you do some liners for us?
Absolutely.
So my question is, we have some people calling in for the contest and questions for you. But my question for you is, Larry, you always hear how Spotify doesn't make money.
Yeah.
So how does Spotify make money?
Well, funny thing about that, just this morning, Spotify announced, among other things, that they started to make money.
Wow! Because they've been
Do
losing
tell.
money, right?
Please
Yeah.
explain.
Yeah. So Spotify makes money the same way Sirius XM does. They sell ads and they get money from subscribers. Period. That's how they make money. And it is a true statement that up until now, Spotify hasn't made money. They've been burning through cash since they started in 2008, and they were spending more money than they were taking in revenue every quarter until just this past quarter. And now they are operating cash flow, profitable. So even though they pay the music companies a lot to be able to play pretty much all the music in the world, and that there have been some questions about the viability of Spotify's model, considering how much they pay record companies and music publishers and performers and songwriters, and whether that would ever be able to make a profit. They just turned a profit.
That's so funny.
I know. So, so that was, one kind of big deal piece of news this morning. Another was that they are knocking on the door of 100 million paid and north of 200 million overall subscribers in the world. But think about that. 100 million paid subs for Spotify alone is, I think, a new and important benchmark for those of us that pay attention to how people are getting music and whether the Spotify model is going to be sustainable or not. The other thing that was announced this morning was that they are in the process of buying not one but two podcasting companies, Anchor and Gimlet, and
Wow.
and many of us know Gimlet as the company that did the Startup podcast and I guess Reply All and many others. In any event, Spotify's CFO, maybe a little known fact outside of the financial community, Spotify's CFO is the former CFO of Netflix. And, people have been asking for a while, can Spotify possibly become the Netflix of audio? And I think that with this announcement this morning about the acquisition of these two podcasting companies, maybe as a way to lower their overall content acquisition costs and become, a more profitable company, that they have, that they've answered the question really loud and clear.
Everybody is making money now. Are the artists making money?
Which ones?
Well, that's actually what I wanted to mention. I mean, all of this data is really reassuring. But one of the things that you hear from one of the label presidents, Capitol Music Group President Ashley Newton, said, you still want to get, encouraging data can be reassuring, but you still want to get those goosebumps from sheer artistry. And the reason I bring that up is we're talking so much business here. We're talking money, lots of money that's flowing back in again. But of those students who put their hands up in your class, they can do that in banking too.
Yeah.
There's a magic to what we do. There's a magic to finding that needle in a haystack, that Adele. And what she's saying, it spoke to me because it's like, yeah, we can talk all about this, but really, why are you in it?
Yeah. Such a good question. And I've got to say that for the executives and just everybody working in the record companies and the people who are studying this stuff in school, or aren't studying it and just aspiring to work in the business, that the ones who are being successful now and who will be successful are the ones who are absolutely on fire about going out into the world and inventing the future of the music business, whether it's by discovering the next brilliant artist, or about building a new way to find and play music at exactly the right time on the right device, or by writing songs, or by playing live, or whatever it is. They are utterly consumed by this, just as we were when we were much younger than we are now. And so that is the case today. But the path to getting there is a little bit different as the business has become quite a bit more sophisticated than it used to be. But in that same interview that quote from Ashley Newton came from, he also said, you got to be aware of false positives from the data. Because look, we got 1 million data inputs when thinking about, whether or not to sign an act and how much to pay and so on. Almost no act in 2019 is getting signed without some evidence that some community of fans out there has started to build.
So they need numbers.
They need some kind of numbers. And it doesn't have...
So nobody if you don't have an Instagram account or you don't have a Twitter account, but you're fantastic, you're unbelievable, but no one's ever heard of you, you don't have a fan base, you really don't have a chance of being signed. You have to go out and build that fan base before. So it's interesting because think of all the artists that we may never have heard from.
Now, I don't want to say it's impossible. It does happen rarely. But it's hard, especially inside a big company, to make the case for why you're going to spend money on artist X instead of artist Y if there isn't some confirming data that says that, there's something that has started there. Or as Tunji Balagan said, who's the head of A&R at RCA now, and let me see, the quote that he had on this particular point, if I can possibly remember it, is he says, look, we are still good at helping artists get started, but where we're really good is taking them from 50 to 100, And that really is the thing that especially the biggest companies in the world are really great at. Taking something that has started, that people are starting to show some interest in, and just, stepping on the gas and taking it all the way. And so, do you have to sign with a label if you're an artist today? No. Chance the Rapper didn't and still hasn't. Many other artists, and including some pretty prominent hip-hop artists in the last few years who started in the DIY mode, have all signed with majors in the last year or two. And I think that the reason is that for the most ambitious artists in the world, that there just is no substitute to having, an army of people, on your team.
I have to hand it to all the people that you spoke to, because bringing the record label business back from the brink is no easy task. I'm from print. I'm from media, and I've seen company after company topple. I mean, Time Inc., where I worked, People Magazine, Time, Teen People, Time Magazine. It was the top of the top. It doesn't exist anymore. And I've watched those executives sit back and laugh at the idea of digital media and not want to change. They couldn't get out of their own way. They were the Titanic that couldn't steer it from the iceberg. And somehow, and that's what's so interesting about your label,
Larry, and I'm from
you were able to do it.
I'm from the
labels
TV
were able
world.
to do it.
MTV, VH1, same thing happened.
Right.
So the question is,
in terms of the music business,
in terms of the music business, for print and for TV, how does that improve
Well, I don't think it does.
I mean, is it done?
That print is done.
Well, let's.
But I think it's so interesting, and I just want to say about this is that they did find a way to steer that Titanic away from the iceberg, and it was rubbing up against that iceberg. And the fact is, none of these label heads are young people, but they were there to listen to the new generation and to say, if we want to survive, we have to do it this way. And we could talk more about that. Yeah. What they're doing.
We got to take one more break, Larry. Once again, we are speaking with Larry Miller, professor at NYU, discussing his report on the state of the record label in 2019. More to come next on Feedback.
You would call, you would say, baby, how's your day? But the day ain't the same. Every other word is yeah, okay. Could it be that you in the crib with another lady? You took it there. First of all, let me say that I am not the one to sit around and be played. So prove yourself to me.
You're listening to Feedback.
Why don't you say the things that you said to me yesterday? And I know you say I'm the same thing.
You're listening to Feedback with Nick and Lori.
Volume, Sirius XM 106.
I hate it when dudes try to chase me, but I love it when you try to save me, 'cause I'm just a lady.
Jim Shear and Lori Majewski. Nick Carter will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, we are joined by Larry Miller, NYU professor, host of the Musonomics podcast. He has been discussing his report on the state of the record label in 2019. We've got about, 4 or 5 minutes left. Time to enter the lightning round. I've got a couple calls I want to get to, but first, for my own selfish reasons, will we live to see the death of MTV? Or can MTV make a comeback just like the record labels? Oh, no! Larry!
He has to do a report first, then he can answer.
Will we live to see the death? I mean, look, the brand has value, right? But why are they still doing those award shows? I'm not sure why, since it's, 20 years on since they played wall-to-wall music videos on that channel? I don't know. I don't get it.
Well, the answer is they still get ad dollars.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the highest paying ad dollar things.
For 13 years of my life, I would interview bands on TV. If you wanted to see a band interviewed in the video format, where do you see that in 2019?
On YouTube, or on Snap, Instagram. I mean, you go where the audience is. But I think that for television programmers and to some extent radio programmers too, I think that in order to address the audiences that exist today, you need to build content for them that is natively built for the way that the audiences want to consume the content today, not, a generation ago. That's the difference.
All right, let's get to some of our callers. We've got Reed in Atlanta. Reed, you're on with Larry Miller.
Thank you. Hey, Larry.
Hey, Reed, what's up?
I have a question. I've written over 1,000 songs. I have 25 albums released independently over the last 20 years. And I'm looking to get my music placed in TV and film and some other platforms. What is your best recommendation?
So if you don't have a music publisher or a record company doing that job for you on an exclusive basis, there are a number of independent pitching services who do nothing but pitch music like yours to music supervisors on a non-exclusive basis and won't ask for you to share the copyright with them. It's just they eat what they kill, and they share the income with you. And there are a number of those services, mostly in New York, LA, and Nashville. And I'm happy to tell you the names of them if you like. There's one, Zinc Music, in New York. There are others in other cities too. But if you were to just do a Google search on independent music pitching services, you would find them. Another avenue for you, though, are companies like Jingle Punks that specialize in the production music business and whose music is featured on just a ridiculous number of reality TV shows, which is a place where a lot of music gets discovered and eventually signed.
Yeah.
We've got another question for you. Chris from Virginia, you were on with Larry Miller.
Good morning, everybody.
Hey.
Thanks for taking my call. I'll make this really quick. I've got two questions, if we can get into them in time. The first question is, I'm a part-time touring and recording musician. My first gig is husband and father, so I do it when I can. What's the incentive anymore for younger? I say younger. I'm in my 40s, but rock bands or whatever type of genre they play. What's the incentive anymore to really seek out a strong label or even an independent label to get signed? Because it just seems like the industry has changed so much, and the only way that you can survive is just tour till you can't see straight anymore.
I think it's a really good question.
We've got about a minute left.
Okay, so just to rephrase the question, why sign even with an independent label? And I think the reason is if they can't make a really strong case how they're going to add value to what it is that you are already doing and making you, wealthier, happier, and make it easier for you to just focus on creating music and touring, then you absolutely shouldn't sign with them, But for somebody, I would say in their 40s who has a family and just doesn't want to be on the road all the time anymore, it is a critical and essential question, and it's a tough one. It's tough to make a living from just your living room.
Yeah,
Well said.
Chris, you got like 20 seconds left for your second question.
Ooh, actually,
No.
we don't. We don't have
All
time for it.
We have
Sorry.
run out of time.
But that was a good
Sorry,
first
Chris.
one. That's okay.
So, Larry, thank you for joining us. Once again, you can check out his report over at musonomics.com. Safe travels to you, Lori.
Thank
Nick
you.
Carter will return tomorrow. See ya.